Okay, so this is the front page of the planner's report that was submitted to as part of the planning appeal documentation. So you can see that it's very clear about where it is and what it is. 24 multiple dwellings at over a couple of different lots in Wynyard Street, South Hobart, and that included the road reserve, fencing, public footpaths, and alterations to traffic circulation. So some of the actual public land, the road reserve, the footpath part of the road reserve, that's the work that the developer is paying for. So that all of that is made clear here. 19 representations were received. That's quite a lot. So normally, a normal application wouldn't get any, maybe one neighbour. Yeah, so 19 is a lot. And it also, City of Hobart lists here the performance criteria that are triggered. So what needs to be considered. Each council does this a little bit differently. In this case, there's an executive summary here and stating 1.2 is important here that the proposal relies on these performance criteria to satisfy the following standards and codes. So that's all important. Private open space, which related to the orientation of the building and where the windows were. Potentially contaminated land. This land's been used for a long time for some fairly noxious industry. A couple of others. The proposal is recommended for approval subject to conditions. The South Hobart Progress Association were very cross about that and took them to appeal, which is why all of this is easy to find, and you can go through all this on the RIMPAT site. The site detail. Okay, so not all councils do this, but in this case, photos of the context was really quite important. So remember to who the planner's report is going to be communicated with. I'm not quite sure how this was dealt with within council, whether it went to city planning or it went to a full council meeting, but in any case, this is an important document in terms of communicating with aldermen. So being very clear about where it is and what exactly is being proposed is really important. So this is done very well. Ooh, scrolling in the wrong place. This is done really well in the case of the South Hobart application. Keep going. This is what the site looks like now. The location of the top site to the entrance. Any of you know who South Hobart will be recognising this. So it has more detail about the actual proposal. I'm scrolling through to section 5 now, eventually what it's going to look like. Background, okay, concerns raised by representatives. This is dealt with differently by different councils. In the case of City of Hobart, they've chosen just to actually put the issues raised by the representatives here, and then they're dealt with in section 6 of the report. So you'll see that they're all here regardless of whether they actually deal with planning matters or not. So you'll see the second one here says the old tannery apartments are aimed at professionals, whereas South Hobart's a family-oriented community. This is not appropriate. Well, fine, people are entitled to their opinions, but this is not a planning matter. So one of the options in the planning report would have been to perhaps put this into a table or have some comment to say this isn't a planning matter. And where there are planning matters that are brought up here, but perhaps the proposal actually meets the acceptable standards, so it's not a discretion and not something that really council has any wriggle room on, you might make that distinction as well. So sunlight in this case does fall under discretion because it doesn't meet the acceptable standard because of the way the orientation and the way the windows are. So, for example, this one, the townhouses will have little light throughout the winter. So there's concern about lack of natural light, overshadowing. So some of that does need to be dealt with as part of the performance criteria. So section 6 is the part of the planning application where the planner deals with all of this. So be very clear that this is an inner residential zone of HIPs. That matters because part of the origins of the inner residential zone, which is a new zone under the changed Tasmanian planning schemes. So these interim schemes have the option of putting it in a residential zone. In the case of Waratah Wynyards, they chose not to use that zone because it just wasn't relevant to their council area. But this came from a bigger issue from regional land use planning that identified a need for denser areas of development, mixed use development in inner parts of Hobart. So this particular area that is close to the middle of Hobart is in a residential precisely to facilitate this kind of development. So because it's been assessed under the Hobart interim planning scheme rather than the old one, it has changed the way that it's being assessed. The proposal's being assessed against these different criteria, parking access code, stormwater management code, etc. The proposal relies on the following performance criteria to comply with the applicable standards, and they outline them here and then go into detail below. So you see 6.5 says each of these is dealt with separately below. And this is something that was emphasised earlier in the unit when Ben Eichen from the City of Hobart came in and said this is where it really pays to be very thorough and logical and lay out your case, particularly if this report does end up coming before tribunal and the assessing officer has to defend their decisions. So being very logical and laying out the evidence and reasons for decisions can really save the planner and the council more generally a lot of time down the track. Okay, what else to show you? Hopefully this doesn't make you feel a bit seasick because this is quite a long document. I'm going to scroll really quickly. Oh, saw the word bicycle there. We'll just keep moving. Eventually, you'll get down to the point where there's some discussion. So the planner makes it clear, where all of this goes. Traffic was a particular issue because of the high number of car parking spaces required, somewhat archaically in my opinion, but we'll leave that aside for now. Then so a lot of the representations and the concern on appeal centred around traffic. So there's a summary here to say the manager of traffic engineering is generally satisfied. They've done their homework in terms of what traffic impact is expected based on the area, on the volumes. So keep going down through the conclusions, and here we have the recommendation. The proposal for the dwellings, all the other bits and pieces part of the permit application satisfies the relevant provisions of HIPS and as such is recommended for approval. So here are the conditions, and this clarifies the scope of the permit. So you've got a whole bunch of engineering conditions in here that I'm not going to make you any more motion sick by scrolling through. So I hope that helps in terms of the actual elements of a planning report. There is differences from one council to the next, but the assignment was meant to get you to think about those main elements. So to analyse the proposal, be clear about the zone, the use, the relevant standards, make sure that there's enough information, say if you think that there needs to be any other assessments, and fourth point being critical, preparing that opinion on the relevant provisions, and where that then ends up leading you to as an overall recommendation of whether it should be approved, probably with conditions, or refused, and why. And don't feel like there's an answer here, because given the large number of cases that come before the tribunal, council doesn't always get this right. So do take your time, and we're interested in your thought and your process as much as where you actually get to. So I hope that helps. Dan is marking this, and we look forward to seeing what you come up with.